2981.2. Man, those are cooking along pretty well. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Suburban Rifleman. This is not going to be a long video. I don't have a bunch of different cameras set up. I will say I just bought a really good professional grade camera with a telephoto lens that I'm going to be able to use as a target camera going forward. I'm also planning on taking it with me when I go back to South Africa next year. Almost none of my hunting footage from last year's trip to South Africa turned out because I took the wrong cameras, and the guys who were trying to help me make videos couldn't find what we were trying to film in the camera as things were going on, and it just didn't turn out well. And I'm going to be a lot more prepared this time. But I do have a new camera coming. I don't have a lot of cameras set up tonight. I'm just filming this with my phone. I've got the Garmin Zero C1 Pro chronograph set up. But I'm mostly out here to test out my new rifle. And if you look at it, you'll say, well, that is a Mauser. And you'd be correct. It's an FN commercial Mauser action with a Seiko or Sako adjustable trigger in it and a barrel, which was made by a company called Jefferson Arms up in Connecticut. I think this rifle was made in about 1958. And this rifle, as well as many others, was marketed as a store brand gun. This was very common practice back in the day. Sears sold guns under the J.C. Higgins and Ted Williams names. Western Auto, which I think was an auto parts store, had store brand guns. And Montgomery Ward sold rifles under the Western Field name. And this is specifically the Ward's Western Field model EJN 757, and it is chambered in caliber 30-06. Now, if you know how to decode Montgomery Ward's model numbers, that three-letter prefix, in this case EJN, was assigned to a specific manufacturer, and then 757 was the model name of the rifle. In this case, EJN was the supplier code for Colt. And you might say, well, I don't remember Colt making any bolt-action rifles, but they did. Well, they kind of did. They marketed bolt-action rifles. As I said, we've got a Sako trigger, we've got an FN commercial Mauser receiver here. The barrel was made by Jefferson Arms under license from and for Colt. And it was marketed by Colt as the Colt Coltsman. In 1957, it was introduced as the Colt Model 57, and they changed it the very next year, 1958, to the Colt Coltsman. It was made in this configuration for about 4 years. I think 1962 or 1963, they switched over. The Colt Coltsman still existed, but instead of having a Sako trigger and an FN Mauser action, the entire action was made by Sako. And I don't want to really talk at great length here. Some of you who keep track of the channel might be saying, didn't you already have an FN Mauser action rifle in 30-06? I did. As a matter of fact, I just sold a 30-06 FN Mauser like 3 months ago. And now I have another one. This one is arguably a little bit better put together, but I don't want to get into a long story. I will explain the reasoning behind this in a future video. Tonight, I'm just here to test the rifle out, and I want to test some kind of unusual ammunition. This is stuff that my dad bought probably in the early 1970s, about the time he bought his Smith & Wesson Model A. I think that was 1972 or 1973 that he bought that. And this ammo probably dates to that time period. And it is 30-06, but this is a little bit unusual. I think his hunting loads were 180 grain, like deer hunting loads were 180 grain ammo. These, however, have 125 grain pointed soft point. And this is kind of weird ammo. It wasn't really designed for big game hunting. 52 or 53 years ago, the country was a much different place. We have really changed as a gun culture in a lot of ways for the better. But nowadays we have specialized rifles for everything. If you're a gun owner, if you're into shooting, you probably own a big game hunting rifle, or I guess medium game hunting rifle, like a 30-06 or a 308 or a 270 or a 6.5 Creedmoor or whatever. And you probably have a dedicated varmint rifle. You might have a target rifle. You might have a couple of ARs for shooting fun. You might own a couple shotguns. You might own numerous handguns. You might own numerous rimfires. But back in these days, a lot of people owned one centerfire rifle. And then they maybe owned two shotguns, a 12 gauge and a 20 gauge for small game hunting, trap shooting, skeet shooting, that kind of stuff. And they maybe owned a couple of 22 rifles for plinking and varmint control, and maybe a handgun, 38 or a 45 or a 9mm, something like that. And this time period from the late 1950s through the, let's say, the early 1970s was a period when people started wanting to have one rifle that could do everything. The .243 Winchester became very popular. The 6mm Remington was introduced and probably should have become a lot more popular than it did. But I'll talk about that. Well, I have talked about that in other videos. I'll talk about that again. But some people, for instance, might have already owned a 30-06 rifle, which they bought because primarily they wanted to hunt white-tailed deer or black bear or elk or what have you. And now they find themselves in a situation where they've got a whole bunch of groundhogs that they want to get rid of. Or maybe there were foxes and coyotes snooping around the chicken coop, stealing eggs and chickens, and 180 grain Remington core-locked was probably a bit much for shooting a groundhog or a fox. So a number of different companies, Remington certainly, this is Remington high-speed ammunition, started loading some of their full-bore hunting cartridges with very lightweight bullets at very high velocities to shoot some of these smaller things. Now these are kind of weird bullets. Remington actually still makes 125 grain core-locked loads. I don't think these are core-locked bullets. They're a very small cylindrical bullet. They clearly have the jacket crimped in. They've got a soft point which is has some cuts there to aid in expansion, and a very sharply tapered cone-shaped nose. So these bullets are not going to have very high sectional density. I think the shape of the bullet indicates that they're probably not going to have a very high ballistic coefficient. They were probably banking on extremely high muzzle velocities to get these bullets to perform well on small varmints and predators. But these didn't have a very good reputation for accuracy. Bullet construction technology has advanced enormously over the last half century. Bullets today are much more uniform, they're much better balanced, they're much more concentric. The barrel twist in most 30-06s, I think, is 1 in 10. Somebody can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But that's really designed to stabilize a 150, 165, 180 grain bullet. It's really quite a bit faster than you need, I would say, to stabilize a little tiny 125 grain pill like this. And so if you have a bullet that's not perfectly formed and you spin it too fast, oftentimes if you spin a bullet too fast today with a modern bullet, you're going to get a bullet that's overstabilized. But if you have small imperfections, the bullet's not perfectly balanced, when you spin it too fast, it can actually start orbiting around your point of aim in larger and larger circles and can end up going someplace you completely didn't intend it to. So I'm kind of interested to see how accurate this stuff was. I've got 13 rounds here. My dad only ever fired 7 of these cartridges, which tells me maybe they weren't particularly accurate. I don't think he'll probably remember, since it's 50 years ago. I could always ask him. But I wanted to take these out here. I've got a target set up at just 50 yards. I know that's not a long range for the 30-06. It's certainly not a long range for varmint shooting, but this is a brand new rifle. I've got a Leupold Vari-X 2 2-7 mounted on here. This is a nice kind of period scope. I thought it complemented the overall aesthetics of this rifle, and it's lovely walnut stock with lots of figure in it. And while this is certainly not a new scope, I've had this mounted on several different rifles over the years, it's certainly new to this rifle, so I didn't want to stretch myself out too far. We do have 25-yard stands here, but you've really got to aim sort of downhill to shoot at those, which is a little bit difficult. So I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that I can hit paper at 50 yards. So let's load up 3 of these. Now, again, this ammo's like 50 years old, and I know that it has lived in at least 3 different basements and an attic and a barn, none of which were climate-controlled environments, so I don't know what that means. But I wasn't able to find any factory data for these old loads. I have no idea what velocity they should be going. I would imagine they'd be screaming along pretty well, but I really just don't know. So I do have the chronograph set up here. I don't have a camera on it, but I will call out my shots and we'll go over the chronograph data after I shoot, and hopefully if these go on paper, we'll take a look at how accurate this was. This is all just a grand experiment, and you're along with me for the ride. So here we go. This is the first shots out of my new rifle, and probably the first shots out of this rifle, judging from the condition of it when I bought it, in quite some time. Sure feeds smooth. These commercial FN actions were built a little tighter than the military ones. They don't have as much looseness and tolerance for sand and stuff, so they're a little bit smoother than a military action Mauser. So put the safety on for the moment, get myself set up here. Here we go, first shot. This trigger is really quite nice. It's about 4 pounds. $29.81.2. Man, those are cooking along pretty well. No signs of excessive pressure. Nice dent in the primer there. $3,086.2. Still going bang after all these years. So I'm either not on the paper or I am right in the black. I'm going to fire one more round and then we'll go down and take a look at the target. $3,045.3. Woohoo! Recoil's not bad at all, but that's to be expected with a 125 grain bullet. Brass looks fine. I'm going to take a quick walk down there and see what my target looks like, if anything. Always keep in mind when you're shooting a Mauser, this is a controlled round feed with this big claw extractor. You can't just flop a cartridge in there and push it home. It's got to feed out of the magazine. They sure feed nice and smooth. Let's see. Here we go. $3,051.7. Other than that first outlier, these are pretty consistent for 50-year-old ammo. I'm afraid that what I thought was my group wasn't my group, however, because I'm still not seeing any marks on the paper. I really don't want to have to move in to 25 yards. All right, I'm going to take another little walk. Look at that, an almost pristine target. If I can't figure out where I'm shooting off of this giant thing. All right, so I found an absolutely enormous, I guess that's an IPSC target, in the trash that was almost pristine. And hopefully we'll see if we're on paper now, because I am not seeing where these rounds are going. That target is bright orange and takes up almost the entire backer. Oh, wow. Yeah, the elevation adjustment I made was good, but this thing is way, 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 way off to the right. That ought to just about do it. So we've got 6 rounds left, and hopefully we can put them all in one group so we can actually see what sort of accuracy we've got. That was 3024.1, by the way. There should be 2 rounds in there, and I've got 4 more. Okay. 3021 even. $3,051.6. All right, we'll shoot up these last 4 rounds. I think it doesn't look too bad. I think it looks like a pretty decent group. This is only 50 yards. It's only 50 yards. 3031.8. Gentlemen, I may have found my new deer rifle. Now, it likes these loads, as wonky as they may be. That opened it up a little bit. That opened it up just a little bit. How's the barrel? It's warm. One more. 3071.1, by the way. $3,085.1. So that's not super great, and as you can see, I had to put up this whole ass IPSC target in order to find where I was shooting. I was all the way over here, and I think that was my 5th shot, maybe? My 7th shot. I had 13 altogether. This is 6 rounds. So that was my 7th shot. And I brought it over here. I didn't make any more adjustments after that. So that's probably a 2-inch group at 50 yards. So that's 4 minutes of angle. Not great by any means, but these loads, the only thing I was able to find out about them is that they don't have a reputation for great accuracy. So I think this actually bodes fairly well for the rifle. Once I put some 165 grain or 150 grain or 180 grain bullets through it, I think we'll be able to find something that this rifle likes, because with ammo that has an absolutely terrible reputation, that's not too bad. I'm actually kind of pleased with that, and it would certainly do the job at 50 yards. Average hunting ranges here in Pennsylvania aren't probably more than 100 yards, so even with this ammo, that would have killed a deer, no problem. So I'm not terribly disappointed. Well, that's not beanfield accuracy by any means, but not too bad. I mean, certainly good enough for knocking out foxes around the hen house. So, our session summary: 13 shots, minimum 2981.2, maximum of 3086.2. So that's an extreme spread of 105.1. Not real good. But as you've seen, the accuracy was good enough for killing a few groundhogs. Standard deviation of 29.4. That's actually pretty good. Average kinetic energy, 2563.7. That's definitely enough for groundhogs. Average PF, that's a new function I have not seen before. That must have come in new firmware update. 379.9 kg little r ft/s. I'm going to have to look that one up. But yeah, standard deviation of 29.4. That's actually pretty good, despite the fact that we had an extreme spread of 105 feet per second. So, kind of weird ammo. I wasn't able to find any ballistics data on this stuff before, so hopefully this has been helpful to one of you. Maybe in the next video we'll take a closer look at this rifle, and I'll talk about it a little bit more and why I bought it. And when I do that, I hope to catch each of you then. Later, guys.